Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where lending money with interest was considered a one-way ticket to hell, literally. We're talking about medieval Europe, where the church had a very clear message about making money from money don't. But as we'll discover, some families had other plans. Picture this, it's 1348, and you're walking through the narrow, cobblestone streets of Florence. The air is thick with the smell of leather, spices, and something else. Opportunity. The Black Death has just swept through Europe, killing a third of the population, and the survivors are scrambling to rebuild their world. It's chaos, but for those brave enough to navigate it, it's also the chance of a lifetime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the heart of medieval Florence, and the first thing that hits you isn't the beauty, it's the smell. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered, multiply it by 10, add some rotting fish, and you're getting close. The narrow streets are literally flowing with waste, both human and animal, creating a cocktail of aromas that would make a modern sewage worker weep. But here's the thing. This isn't just any ordinary medieval city. This is Florence, 1348, and despite the apocalyptic hygiene standards, it's about to become the financial center of the known world. The irony, it's all going to be built on something the church considers the ultimate sin usury. Let's talk about usury for a moment. In medieval times, this wasn't just frowned upon. It was literally considered one of the worst sins you could commit. The church taught that money was sterile, that it couldn't reproduce naturally, so charging interest was like playing God with creation itself. Usurers were depicted in art as being tortured in the seventh circle of hell, right alongside murderers and violent criminals. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of being a social media influencer. Technically legal, but morally questionable. The biblical justification was crystal clear: lend, hoping for nothing in return. Luke 6:35 wasn't just a suggestion, it was divine law. Charging interest was seen as profiting from time itself, and time belonged to God alone. It was like trying to sell air, which, honestly, in today's world, someone would probably figure out how to do. But here's where it gets interesting. You're a merchant in 1348 Florence, and you've just survived the worst pandemic in human history. 1/3 of Europe's population is dead, including most of your customers, suppliers, and probably half your family. The economy is in shambles, but paradoxically, those who survived are inheriting wealth from multiple deceased relatives. There's money around, but the traditional banking system, what little existed, has collapsed along with everything else. You need capital to restart trade. You need loans to rebuild. You need financial services that simply don't exist because the church has banned them all. It's like trying to run a modern business without banks, credit cards, or even the concept of investment. Every transaction is cash, only every deal is handshake-based, and every long-distance trade requires you to physically carry gold and silver across bandit-infested roads. The traditional moneylenders are mainly Jewish merchants who aren't bound by Christian usury laws, but they're heavily restricted in what they can do and where they can operate. They're basically the medieval equivalent of payday loan shops, technically serving a need, but stigmatized and limited in scope. Most Christians who need money have to rely on personal relationships, family networks, or illegal underground lending. which comes with its own set of problems, like getting your legs broken if you're late on payments. But in this chaos, a few Italian families are starting to see opportunity. They're looking at the church's prohibition on usury and thinking, what if we could make money from money without technically charging interest? It's like finding a loophole in the terms of service agreement that lets you download the entire internet for free. The Medici family isn't even on the map yet. They're still relatively small, time wool merchants at this point. But they're watching, learning, and most importantly, thinking. They're seeing the massive gap between what the economy needs and what religious law allows, and they're starting to formulate a plan that will change everything. Consider this. The medieval economy was like trying to run a marathon while wearing a straitjacket. You had goods to move, people to pay, investments to make, but no financial tools to do it efficiently. Imagine if today's economy operated only on cash transactions, with no banks, no credit, no loans, no investment mechanisms. That's essentially what medieval Europe was dealing with, and it was suffocating economic growth. The church's position wasn't entirely unreasonable from their perspective. They'd seen what happened in the late Roman Empire, where debt slavery and predatory lending had created massive social instability. They were trying to prevent exploitation of the poor, which is actually pretty admirable. But they were also inadvertently strangling the very economic innovation that could lift society out of poverty. You're witnessing the birth of what would become modern capitalism. But nobody realizes it yet. The Medici family is about to crack the code on how to provide financial services while technically staying within religious law. They're going to revolutionize everything from international trade to artistic patronage, and they're going to do it by being smarter than everyone else in the room. The stage is set, the need is desperate, and the opportunity is massive. A small wool merchant family is about to become the most powerful banking dynasty in European history, and they're going to do it by mastering the art of making money from money without calling it interest. The question isn't whether they'll succeed. History already knows that answer. The question is how they'll manage to convince God, the church, and their competitors that they're not actually doing what everyone knows they're doing. And trust me, their solution is going to be absolutely brilliant. But first, you need to understand exactly who these wool merchants were, and why a family trade in fuzzy sheep products was about to become the foundation of a financial empire that would reshape European civilization. You've just witnessed the aftermath of Europe's greatest catastrophe, and now you're about to meet the most unlikely heroes of this story. A family whose business card would have read, Medici and Sons, premium wool merchants, not exactly the kind of R.A. Somme you'd expect for future banking royalty. But then again, the most successful entrepreneurs often come from the most unexpected places. The year is 1360, and you're standing in the Medici family workshop in Florence. The smell hits you first. Wet wool lanolin, and the distinctive odor of sheep that have been dead for weeks. It's like walking into a medieval Bath and Body Works, if their signature scent was Barnyard Nightmare. But don't let the humble surroundings fool you. This cramped, smelly workshop is about to become the launching pad for the most powerful financial dynasty in European history. Giovanni de Medici, remember that name, is hunched over his ledger books, and he's not just counting sheep, he's counting opportunities. Born around 1360, Giovanni represents the second generation of Medici wool merchants, but unlike his predecessors, he's got his eyes on a much bigger prize than just selling fleece to textile manufacturers. Here's what makes Giovanni different from every other wool merchant in Florence. He understands that the real money isn't in the wool itself. It's in the financial networks that make wool trading possible. Think of him as the medieval equivalent of someone who realizes that the real value in social media isn't the posts, but the data about who's looking at them. Florence in 1360 is essentially a medieval Silicon Valley, but instead of tech startups, it's all about textile guilds. The city is run by a complex system of guilds, professional associations that control everything from who can practice certain trades to who gets to participate in government. It's like LinkedIn, but with actual life, or death consequences if you don't network properly. The Art di Lana, or Wool Guild, is one of the most powerful organizations in Florence. Being a member isn't just about business. It's about political power, social status, and survival. The guild system is simultaneously the most democratic and most oligarchic structure you could imagine. Democratic because technically anyone can join a guild and participate in government. Oligarchic because the same wealthy families control everything behind the scenes. Giovanni is playing a game that most people don't even realize exists. While his competitors are focused on sourcing the finest wool from England and Flanders, he's studying the financial mechanics of how international trade actually works. He's noticed something crucial. The biggest profits don't come from owning the goods. They come from financing the transactions that make trading possible. Picture this: a Florentine textile manufacturer wants to buy wool from England. In our modern world, they'd wire transfer the money, maybe use a letter of credit, and complete the transaction in hours. But in 1360, they have to physically transport gold and silver across hundreds of miles of bandit-infested roads or trust a complex network of personal relationships and IOUs. It's like trying to run Amazon using only cash transactions and carrier pigeons. Giovanni sees the inefficiency and thinks, what if I could solve this problem? But remember, he can't just open a bank and start charging interest. That's still a one-way ticket to hell. So he starts experimenting with what we might call creative financial engineering. His first innovation is brilliantly simple. Instead of lending money and charging interest, he starts investing in trading ventures. Rather than saying, I'll lend you 100 florins and you'll pay me back 110, he says, I'll invest 100 florins in your wool shipment, and when you sell it, I'll take my share of the profits. Same result, different terminology, and technically not usury. But Giovanni's real genius isn't just in the financial mechanics. It's in understanding Florence's political landscape. The city is a republic, but it's a republic where wealth equals influence, and influence equals survival. The old noble families are losing power to the merchant class, but the transition is messy, violent, and unpredictable. Florence's government is basically a medieval version of a reality TV show. Every 2 months, they literally draw names from a bag to select new city officials. It's called the scrutiny, and it's designed to prevent any one faction from gaining too much power. Imagine if we selected our government officials through a lottery system, but the lottery was rigged by whoever had the most money to influence the selection process. Giovanni realizes that in this chaotic system, financial services aren't just a business opportunity, they're a political necessity. Politicians need money to fund their campaigns, maintain their lifestyles, and pay for the mercenary armies that keep them in power. But they can't get loans from traditional sources because of the usury prohibition. It's like having a city full of people who desperately need Uber, but taxis are illegal. The Medici family starts positioning themselves as the solution to this problem. They're not moneylenders, they're business partners. They're not charging interest, they're sharing profits. They're not running a bank. They're facilitating commerce. It's linguistic gymnastics that would make a modern corporate lawyer weep with joy. By 1380, Giovanni has figured out how to make money from money while staying technically within church law. He's developed a network of business relationships that spans from Florence to London to Bruges. He's financing trade deals, currency exchanges, and even some early forms of insurance. And most importantly, he's building political connections that will prove crucial for his family's future. The other wool merchants are still thinking about sheep. Giovanni is thinking about systems. While they're competing for the best fleece, he's building the financial infrastructure that will make all commerce possible. He's not just selling wool, he's creating the mechanism that will allow everyone else to sell everything else. But here's the beautiful irony. Giovanni's success in the wool trade is actually providing the perfect cover for his banking innovations. To the outside world, the Medici family is just another successful merchant family. Nobody realizes they're quietly revolutionizing the entire concept of money and credit. Florence's political elite is starting to notice that the Medici family seems to have an unusual amount of liquid capital available for business partnerships. Other merchant families are wondering how a wool trading business can afford to finance so many diverse ventures. The church is beginning to pay attention to this family that seems to be prospering in ways that don't quite match their official business activities. Giovanni is walking a tightrope between innovation and heresy, between wealth and survival, between serving God and serving mammon. And he's about to pass this delicate balancing act to his son Cosimo, who will take the family's financial innovations and turn them into something that will reshape the entire European economy. The wool merchant's son is about to become the most powerful banker in the known world, and he's going to do it by mastering the art of making money appear out of thin air. You're about to witness the birth of modern banking, but it's happening in a world where the very concept you're about to see could get you excommunicated, exiled, or worse. And Cosimo de Medici has just inherited his father's wool business. But what he's really inherited is something far more valuable, a network of financial relationships that he's about to transform into the most sophisticated money-making machine Europe has ever seen. Picture yourself in the newly established Medici Bank on Via Porta Rossa in Florence. The building doesn't look like much from the outside. No marble columns, no impressive facades. It's designed to blend in, to look like just another merchant's workshop. But step inside, and you'll discover something that would make a modern investment banker weep with envy. A financial operation so advanced, so innovative, that it won't be matched for centuries. The first thing that strikes you isn't the luxury, it's the sound. The constant scratch of quill pens on parchment, the soft clink of coins being counted, the rustle of documents being shuffled. But there's something else, something that would be completely foreign to any other business of this era, the sound of systematic record keeping. Every transaction, every exchange, every profit and loss is being meticulously documented using a revolutionary new system called double entry bookkeeping. Now, double entry bookkeeping might sound about as exciting as watching paint dry, but in 1397, it's essentially magic. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of inventing the spreadsheet. For the first time in human history, a business can track exactly where every penny comes from and where it goes. It's like having X-ray vision for money, and the Medici are the first family to master this superpower. Here's how revolutionary this is before double entry bookkeeping. Business accounting was basically educated guessing. Merchants would keep rough notes, maybe tally up their coins at the end of the day, and hope for the best. It was like running a modern corporation using only sticky notes and good intentions. The Medici system, by contrast, is so precise that they can tell you exactly how much profit they made on a single wool shipment to London 3 years ago. But the real genius isn't in the bookkeeping. It's in how Cosimo is using this precision to circumvent the church's prohibition on usury. Remember, charging interest is still a mortal sin, but what if you're not technically charging interest? What if you're doing something else entirely? Enter the bill of exchange, possibly the most elegant financial instrument ever created. Here's how it works. Let's say you're a merchant in Florence who needs to pay a supplier in London. Instead of stuffing a bag with gold coins and hoping you don't get robbed by bandits, you go to the Medici Bank. You give them 100 florins in Florence, and they give you a document, a bill of exchange, that your supplier in London can take to the Medici branch there and redeem for the equivalent amount in English pounds. Sounds simple, right? But here's the beautiful part: the exchange rate. When the Medici convert your 100 florins to English pounds, they're not just converting currency, they're building in their profit through the exchange rate. They're not charging you interest on a loan, they're making money on the currency conversion. It's like uber surge pricing, but for medieval money, and completely legal under church law. The mathematics of this are stunning. The Medici aren't just making money on individual transactions. They're making money on the flow of money itself. Every time currency changes hands, every time someone needs to move money from one place to another, the Medici are taking a small cut. It's like charging a toll on every financial transaction in Europe. Except you've convinced everyone that you're actually providing a public service. But Cosimo's innovation goes even deeper. He's realized that the real power isn't in moving money. It's in creating money. Through a system of interconnected branches across Europe, the Medici Bank is essentially creating credit out of thin air. They're lending money that doesn't actually exist, backed by the promise of future profits from their vast network of commercial relationships. Here's how it works. The Medici Bank in Florence loans money to a merchant for a trading venture. But instead of giving him actual coins, they give him a credit note that he can use at any Medici branch. The merchant takes this credit note to London, where the Medici branch there honors it, essentially creating new money in the London economy. Meanwhile, the Florence branch has already invested the original loan in something else, multiplying the effect. It's like a magic trick where you make one coin turn into 5 coins, except the magic is real and the coins are actually worth something. The Medici have figured out how to create money from the velocity of money itself. They're not just banking, they're conducting a symphony of financial instruments that creates wealth through pure orchestration. The scale of this operation is breathtaking. By 1400, the Medici Bank has branches in Rome, Naples, Milan, Geneva, Lyon, Bruges, and London. They're handling the finances of kings, popes, and merchants across Europe. They're financing trade routes, funding wars, and even lending money to governments. And they're doing it all while maintaining the fiction that they're just humble wool merchants who happen to be good at foreign exchange. The political implications are staggering. When you control the flow of money, you control power itself. Kings who want to wage war need the Medici to finance their armies. The Pope needs the Medici to transfer church funds across Europe. Merchants need the Medici to facilitate international trade. The family that started as wool sellers has become the central nervous system of the European economy. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Medici aren't just creating a banking system. They're creating a new form of political power. Traditional power came from land, military might, or divine authority. Medici power comes from being indispensable to everyone else's ambitions. They're like the medieval equivalent of Amazon Web Services. You might not love them, but you literally can't run your business without them. The other merchant families in Florence are starting to notice that something extraordinary is happening. The Medici are accumulating wealth at a pace that seems impossible for a wool trading business. They're building palaces, commissioning artworks, and wielding political influence that far exceeds their supposed social status. It's like watching your neighbor who claims to work at a gas station suddenly start driving Lamborghinis and buying sports teams. The church is getting nervous too. They can't quite figure out how to condemn the Medici's activities because technically, nothing they're doing violates canon law. But somehow, this family is making enormous profits from activities that look suspiciously like the money. Changing that Jesus threw out of the temple. It's like trying to prosecute someone for speeding when they're technically riding a bicycle, but somehow going 200 miles per hour. Cosimo is walking an increasingly narrow line between innovation and heresy. He's creating financial instruments that won't be fully understood for centuries, but he's doing it in a world where the wrong interpretation of his activities could lead to his excommunication or worse. Every transaction is a calculated risk. Every innovation is a potential death sentence. The most brilliant part of the Medici strategy is how they've managed to make their financial innovations seem inevitable and natural. They're not revolutionizing banking. They're just solving practical problems for their customers. They're not creating new forms of money. They're just making existing commerce more efficient. They're not challenging the church's authority. They're just finding creative ways to serve God while serving Mammon. But as Cosimo's influence grows, so does the target on his back. The traditional power structures of Florence are beginning to realize that a fundamental shift is occurring, and they're not sure they like it. The Medici Bank is about to face its first major test, and it's going to come from the very people who should be their natural allies. The stage is set for a confrontation that will determine whether financial innovation can overcome political tradition, whether a family of wool merchants can truly challenge the established order of medieval Europe. You've just witnessed the birth of modern banking, but now you're about to see something even more extraordinary, the moment when money stops being just a tool for commerce and becomes the ultimate weapon of political control. Welcome to the world where a banker's ledger book becomes more powerful than a king's sword, and where the real rulers of Europe aren't the ones wearing crowns, they're the ones counting coins. It's 1433, and you're standing in the Medici Palace in Florence, watching Cosimo de Medici receive a visitor who would make any modern CEO weep with envy. The visitor is Pope Eugenius IV, and he's not here for a social call. He's here because he's broke. That's right, the spiritual leader of Western Christianity, the man who speaks for God on earth, is hat in hand begging for a loan from a wool merchant's son. The scene is almost surreal. Here's the Pope, draped in silk and gold, surrounded by cardinals and Swiss guards, sitting across from Cosimo in a room that smells like account books and dried ink. The Pope is explaining, with as much dignity as he can muster, that the Papal States are facing a cash flow crisis. The Holy See needs money to fund its armies, maintain its territories, and keep the entire Catholic Church functioning. And there's only one man in Europe who can provide that kind of liquidity: the guy whose grandfather sold sheep wool for a living. But here's where it gets really interesting. Cosimo isn't just going to write a check and send the Pope on his way. He's going to extract concessions, political favors, and business advantages that will cement the Medici family's position for generations. It's like watching someone negotiate with God's representative on earth. Except the person with the real power is sitting on the side of the table with the abacus. The Pope needs 100,000 florins immediately. In today's money, that's roughly 50 million. It's not just pocket change. It's the kind of money that can fund armies, build cathedrals, or topple governments. And Cosimo has it. Not only does he have it, but he can produce it faster than any government, any royal treasury, or any other financial institution in Europe. This is the moment when you realize the Medici haven't just revolutionized banking, they've revolutionized power itself. Traditional medieval power was based on land, military might, or divine authority. But the Medici have discovered a fourth type of power, the power of liquidity. They can make things happen immediately, while everyone else has to wait for tax seasons, military campaigns, or divine intervention. Think about what this means. Kings need months to raise armies through feudal obligations. The church needs years to collect tithers from across Europe. But the Medici can mobilize massive amounts of capital in a matter of hours. It's like having a superpower in a world where everyone else is still walking, while you've invented the airplane. The mechanics of this power are beautiful in their simplicity. When the Pope needs money, he can't just print more. Medieval economies don't work that way. He can't raise taxes without risking rebellion. He can't borrow from other sources because the Medici have essentially monopolized the lending market. So he has to come to Florence, sit in this counting house, and negotiate with a man whose social status, technically, is far below his own. But Cosimo isn't just providing a service, he's extracting tribute. In exchange for the loan, the Pope agrees to bank all future church revenues through Medici branches. He gives the Medici family exclusive rights to handle papal finances across Europe. He even agrees to favorable treatment for Medici business interests in territories controlled by the church. It's like watching someone leverage a short-term favor into a long-term monopoly. The Pope gets his immediate cash flow problem solved, but he's essentially handed control of the church's financial future to a family of Florentine merchants. The Medici have just become the Catholic Church's CFO, and they're going to hold that position for the next century. The ripple effects are staggering. When you control the church's finances, you control the church's political decisions. When you control the church's political decisions, you influence the politics of every Catholic country in Europe. The Medici haven't just become bankers to the Pope, they've become shadow puppeteers of European Christianity. But the Pope is just the beginning. By 1440, the Medici Bank is handling the finances of the King of England, the Duke of Burgundy, and half the noble houses of Italy. Each relationship follows the same pattern: immediate liquidity in exchange for long-term political concessions. The Medici are essentially turning every European ruler into their client, and every client into their political asset. Consider the King of England's situation. He's fighting the 100 Years' War with France, and wars are expensive. Medieval armies require constant funding for weapons, armor supplies, and mercenary payments. The English royal treasury is empty, and traditional feudal obligations can't provide the kind of continuous cash flow that modern warfare demands. Enter the Medici Bank. They offer the King of England a line of credit that will allow him to maintain his armies indefinitely. But in exchange, They want exclusive trading rights in English territories, favorable treatment for Florentine merchants, and political support for Medici interests in Italy. The king gets his war funding, but he's essentially mortgaged his kingdom's economic future to a family of Italian bankers. The genius of this system is that it's self-reinforcing. The more clients the Medici Bank has, the more political influence they wield. The more political influence they wield, the more clients they can attract. It's like a snowball effect, except the snowball is made of money and political power, and it's rolling downhill through every royal court in Europe. The other merchant families in Florence are starting to realize that something fundamental has changed. The Medici aren't just richer than everyone else. They're operating in a completely different category of power. When other families want to influence politics, they have to lobby, petition, or bribe individual officials. When the Medici want to influence politics, they just remind people how much money they owe them. It's like watching someone play chess while everyone else is playing checkers. The traditional political players are still focused on territory, military alliances, and dynastic marriages. But the Medici are playing a game where the pieces are debt obligations, credit lines, and financial dependencies. They're not conquering territory, they're conquering balance sheets. The most brilliant part of the Medici strategy is how they've made their political influence seem like a natural consequence of their business success. They're not political schemers. They're just bankers who happen to have a lot of influential clients. They're not trying to control European politics. They're just providing financial services to people who need them. But behind this facade of humble commerce lies one of the most sophisticated political operations in European history. The Medici have created a network of financial dependencies that spans from London to Naples, from Paris to Constantinople. Every major political decision in Europe now has to consider the Medici Bank's interests, because every major political player owes them money. The traditional nobility is starting to panic. They're realizing that their centuries-old advantages, noble birth, military prowess, divine right, are being trumped by something as mundane as accounting skills and cash flow management. It's like watching aristocrats realize that their swords are useless against calculators. The church is having an existential crisis. They've spent centuries teaching that the love of money is the root of all evil. But now they're dependent on a family whose entire business model is based on making money from money. It's like having to condemn capitalism while being entirely dependent on venture capital funding. But the most shocking realization is yet to come. The Medici aren't just using their financial power to influence politics. They're about to use it to reshape European culture itself. They're going to take the wealth they've accumulated through banking and invest it in something that will make them immortal: art, architecture, and intellectual achievement. The family that started by selling wool is about to become the greatest cultural patrons in human history, and they're going to use their banking profits to fund a complete transformation of European civilization. You've just witnessed the Medici family become Europe's shadow government through financial manipulation. But now you're about to discover something even more extraordinary: how they use their banking profits to buy immortality itself. Welcome to the world where art isn't just beauty. It's the ultimate form of political propaganda, social engineering, and brand management all rolled into one masterpiece. It's 1445, and you're standing in Cosimo de Medici's private study, watching him examine architectural plans for a new church. But this isn't just any church. It's San Lorenzo, and it's going to be the most expensive building project in Florence's history. The plans sprawled across his desk represent an investment of over 40 zallos and florins, roughly 20 million in today's money. And here's the kicker. Cosimo is paying for the entire thing out of his own pocket. Your first thought might be, what a generous act of Christian charity. But you'd be wrong. This is one of the most calculated business investments in human history, and you're about to witness the birth of what we now call soft power, the ability to influence people not through force or money, but through culture, ideas, and beauty. The genius of Cosimo's strategy becomes clear when you understand what he's really buying. He's not just commissioning a church. He's purchasing the right to be remembered forever. Every person who enters San Lorenzo will see the Medici coat of arms, the Medici family tombs, and the Medici-funded artwork. It's like buying a 500-year advertising campaign that positions your family as the greatest patrons of Christianity in Florence. But the calculation goes even deeper. By funding religious architecture, Cosimo is essentially laundering his banking profits through divine approval. Remember, all his wealth comes from financial activities that the church considers morally questionable. But when he uses that wealth to build churches, commission religious artwork, and fund Christian scholarship, he's transforming sinful money into holy monuments. It's like watching someone solve a 15th century PR crisis. The Medici have made their fortune through activities that technically violate Christian teaching, but they're using those profits to become the most visible supporters of Christian culture. Every time someone questions the morality of their banking practices, they can point to their churches, their religious artwork, and their support for Christian scholars. The San Lorenzo project is just the beginning. By 1450, the Medici family is funding so many artistic projects that Florence is beginning to look like a 15th century version of Las Vegas. If Las Vegas were built by someone with exquisite taste and unlimited funds. They're commissioning frescoes, sculptures, manuscripts, and architectural marvels at a pace that would make modern tech billionaires weep with envy. But here's where it gets really sophisticated. The Medici aren't just randomly throwing money at artists. They're curating their cultural investments with the same precision they bring to their banking operations. Every artist they support, every project they fund, every cultural institution they sponsor is chosen for its ability to advance their political and social objectives. Take their relationship with Donatello, for example. This isn't just artistic patronage, it's strategic cultural warfare. Donatello's sculptures are revolutionary, breaking with centuries of artistic tradition to create works that are startlingly realistic and emotionally powerful. By funding Donatello's innovations, the Medici are positioning themselves as the champions of intellectual progress and artistic freedom. The political implications are staggering. When you control the cultural narrative, you control how people think about power, authority, and social hierarchy. The Medici are using art to reshape public opinion about merchant families, financial innovation, and the relationship between wealth and virtue. They're not just patrons, they're cultural engineers. Consider the calculated genius of their approach to classical learning. The Medici are funding scholars to translate ancient Greek and Roman texts that have been lost to Western Europe for centuries. They're building libraries, supporting academics, and creating intellectual institutions that will preserve and transmit knowledge for future generations. This looks like pure altruism, but it's actually brilliant brand management. By associating themselves with classical learning and intellectual achievement, the Medici are connecting their family name with the golden age of human civilization. They're not just bankers. They're the inheritors of Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero. The ripple effects are extraordinary. Florence is becoming a magnet for the most talented artists, scholars and intellectuals in Europe. Everyone wants to work for the Medici, not just because they pay well, but because they're creating an environment where creativity and innovation can flourish. It's like watching someone create the world's first think tank, except the think tank is also producing the most beautiful art in human history. But the most brilliant aspect of the Medici cultural strategy is how they've made their investments seem inevitable and natural. They're not trying to buy influence. They're just supporting talented people who happen to create things that make the Medici family look good. They're not manipulating public opinion. They're just funding projects that happen to advance their political interests. The scale of their cultural operation is breathtaking. By 1460, the Medici Bank is not just financing trade and government debt. It's underwriting the entire Renaissance. They're funding the artists who will create the masterpieces that define Western civilization. They're supporting the scholars whose translations will reshape European intellectual life. They're building the architectural monuments that will inspire awe for centuries. The other wealthy families in Florence are starting to realize that they've been outmaneuvered in ways they never imagined. The Medici aren't just richer than everyone else. They're operating in a completely different category of cultural influence. When other families want to display their wealth, they buy expensive clothes or throw lavish parties. When the Medici want to display their wealth, they reshape human civilization. It's like watching someone play a game where everyone else is competing for short-term advantages, while the Medici are building monuments to their eternal glory. The traditional nobility can trace their lineage back centuries, but the Medici are ensuring that their names will be remembered for millennia. The church is experiencing another crisis of conscience. They're simultaneously grateful for the Medici's generous support of Christian art and architecture, and deeply uncomfortable with the implications of accepting money from sources they consider morally questionable. It's like being forced to choose between your principles and your survival, except the choice is being made for you by people who control your funding. But the most shocking realization is yet to come. The Medici cultural investments aren't just about Florence. They're about to transform the entire intellectual landscape of Europe. The artists they're training, the scholars they're supporting, and the ideas they're promoting are going to spread across the continent, carrying Medici influence to every major city in the known world. The family that started by selling wool is about to become the primary driver of European cultural development. Their banking profits are going to fund a complete transformation of art, literature, philosophy, and science. They're not just patrons of the Renaissance. They're the Renaissance. But this cultural revolution is going to attract attention from people who have very different ideas about who should control European civilization. The Medici are about to discover that when you reshape culture, you inevitably challenge the existing power structures, and not everyone is going to appreciate their innovations. The stage is set for a confrontation that will test whether financial power and cultural influence can overcome political tradition and religious authority. The Medici have built an empire of beauty and learning, but empires always attract enemies, and their enemies are about to make their move. You've just witnessed the Medici transform from bankers into cultural kingmakers, but now you're about to see something that will make their previous achievements look like child's play. Welcome to the moment when a single family's financial network becomes so vast so sophisticated, and so indispensable that it essentially replaces the medieval economy with something entirely new, the first truly global financial system. It's 1455, and you're standing in the map room of the Medici Bank's headquarters in Florence, staring at something that would make a modern multinational corporation CEO weep with envy. Stretched across the walls are detailed maps of Europe, but these aren't just geographical charts. They're financial battle plans. Every major city is marked with colored pins indicating Medici branch locations, credit lines, and political relationships. It looks like a medieval version of a military command center, except the armies are made of accountants, and the weapons are letters of credit. The sheer scale of what you're seeing is almost incomprehensible. The Medici Bank now has over 100 branches, sub-branches, and correspondent relationships spanning from London to Constantinople, from Lisbon to Moscow. They've essentially created a parallel financial infrastructure that operates across national boundaries, religious divisions, and political conflicts. It's like watching someone build the internet. Except instead of transmitting data, they're transmitting money. And instead of connecting computers, they're connecting entire civilizations. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. The Medici haven't just created a banking network. They've created a financial ecosystem that's more reliable, more efficient, and more trustworthy than most governments. When kings default on their debts, when wars destroy trade routes, when plagues devastate cities, the Medici Bank keeps operating. They've built something that's more stable than the Holy Roman Empire and more enduring than most monarchies. The mechanics of this system are beautiful in their complexity. Imagine you're a merchant in Bruges who needs to pay a supplier in Venice. In the old system, you'd have to transport actual gold and silver across hundreds of miles, risking bandits, storms, and political upheavals. The journey could take months, and you might lose everything to pirates or highwaymen. With the Medici system, you walk into their Bruges branch, hand over your money, and receive a coded letter. Your supplier in Venice takes that letter to the Medici branch there and receives payment in local currency. The transaction is completed in days instead of months, with virtually no risk of theft or loss. But here's the really brilliant part. The Medici aren't just facilitating this transaction. They're making money on both ends, plus profiting from the currency exchange, plus earning interest on the float time between transactions. It's like they've invented a medieval version of Visa, except they control the entire payment system, set all the exchange rates, and take a cut of every transaction in Europe. They're not just providing a service, they're essentially taxing the entire European economy, one transaction at a time. The political implications are staggering. When you control the flow of money, you control the flow of power. The Medici Bank has become so essential to European commerce that national governments literally cannot function without their cooperation. Want to fund a war? You need the Medici. Want to collect taxes from distant territories? You need the Medici. Want to trade with other countries? You need the Medici. Consider what this means for traditional power structures. Medieval authority was based on land ownership, military might, and divine right. But the Medici have created a new form of authority based on financial indispensability. They don't need armies to enforce their will. They just need to threaten to cut off someone's access to credit. It's like having a nuclear deterrent, except the weapon is economic rather than military. The sophistication of their operations would impress modern financial analysts. The Medici have developed early forms of portfolio diversification, risk management, and even derivative trading. They're not just lending money, They're creating complex financial instruments that allow them to profit from market volatility, currency fluctuations, and political instability. Take their approach to government debt, for example. Instead of simply lending money to kings and hoping for repayment, the Medici have developed a system where they securitize government obligations, selling shares in royal debt to multiple investors. If a king defaults, the Medici's losses are minimized because they've spread the risk across their entire network. It's like watching someone invent modern investment banking 500 years before it was supposed to exist. But the most brilliant aspect of the Medici network is how they've made their financial dominance seem inevitable and natural. They're not trying to control European commerce. They're just providing services that happen to be essential to everyone's survival. They're not manipulating markets. They're just responding to natural economic forces that happen to benefit their business model. The scale of their information network is equally impressive. Every Medici branch reports back to Florence with intelligence about local political developments, economic trends, and social changes. They know about wars before the combatants' own generals do. They understand market conditions better than the merchants who create them. They have advance warning of political upheavals that will affect their investments. It's like having a private intelligence agency that spans the entire known world. The Medici aren't just bankers. They're the best informed people in Europe, and they're using that information to make investment decisions that consistently outperform everyone else's. They're not just playing the game. They're seeing the game from a perspective that no one else can access. The ripple effects of their network are transforming European civilization in ways that even the Medici probably don't fully understand. By making international commerce more efficient and reliable, they're accelerating the development of capitalism. By creating stable financial relationships across national boundaries, they're laying the groundwork for modern globalization. By standardizing banking practices across multiple countries, they're creating the foundation for international finance. The other merchant families in Europe are starting to realize that they're not just competing with the Medici. They're operating in a completely different economic system. The Medici have essentially created their own currency, their own trade routes, and their own commercial law. Everyone else is still playing by medieval rules, while the Medici are operating according to principles that won't be fully understood for centuries. The Church is experiencing another existential crisis. They're simultaneously dependent on the Medici for their financial operations and deeply uncomfortable with the implications of a single family controlling so much of Europe's economy. It's like being forced to choose between your theological principles and your institutional survival. Except the choice is being made for you by people who control your treasury. But the most shocking realization is yet to come. The Medici network isn't just about commerce. It's about power, and power always attracts enemies. The traditional nobility, the established churches, and the rival merchant families are starting to understand that the Medici represent a fundamental threat to the existing order. They're not just successful, they're operating according to completely different rules. The stage is set for a confrontation that will test whether financial innovation can overcome political tradition, whether a family of bankers can survive the combined opposition of Europe's established power structures. The Medici have built a financial empire that spans continents. But empires always attract enemies, and their enemies are about to demonstrate that some things are more powerful than money. The family that revolutionized banking is about to discover that when you challenge the fundamental structures of society, society has ways of fighting back. And the next chapter of their story is going to be written in blood. You've just witnessed the Medici family build the most sophisticated financial empire in European history. But now you're about to discover that when you accumulate enough power, the entire world conspires to destroy you. Welcome to the moment when centuries of resentment, jealousy, and political calculation explode into the most audacious assassination plot in Renaissance history. It's April 26, 1478, and you're standing in the Cathedral of Florence during High Mass, surrounded by the most powerful people in the city. The air is thick with incense, the sound of Latin prayers, and something else. A tension so palpable you can almost taste it. What you're about to witness isn't just an assassination attempt. It's the culmination of a conspiracy that involves the Pope, rival banking families, and half the nobility of Italy. And the target, Lorenzo the Medici, the man who has become so powerful that his enemies believe killing him is the only way to restore the natural order of things. The scene is almost surreal in its audacity. Here you are, in the holiest place in Florence, during the most sacred moment of the Catholic Mass, and you're about to witness multiple murders committed literally at the altar of God. It's like planning a terrorist attack during a presidential inauguration, except the terrorists are funded by the Vatican, and the target is someone whose only crime was being too successful at banking. Let's talk about the conspiracy, because it's a masterpiece of political coordination that would make modern intelligence agencies weep with envy. The plot involves the Pazzi family, Florence's second, most powerful banking dynasty, along with Archbishop Salviati, Count Girolamo Riario, the Pope's nephew, and Pope Sixtus IV himself. Yes, that's right, the spiritual leader of Western Christianity has personally approved a plan to murder the Medici family during religious services. The motivations are a toxic blend of envy, political ambition, and genuine fear. The Pazzi family has been systematically outmaneuvered by the Medici for decades. Every major banking contract, every political appointment, every cultural commission seems to go to the Medici. They're not just losing business, they're becoming irrelevant in their own city. It's like watching blockbuster executives plotting to assassinate the founders of Netflix. But the Pazzi are just the local muscle in this operation. The real power behind the conspiracy is Pope Sixtus IV, and his motivations are more complex. The Pope isn't just threatened by the Medici's wealth, he's threatened by their independence. The Medici Bank has become so powerful that they're essentially dictating terms to the Church. When the Pope needs money, he has to ask the Medici. When the Church wants to implement financial policy, they have to consider Medici interests. From the Pope's perspective, this is intolerable. The spiritual leader of Christianity shouldn't have to negotiate with bankers about church policy. It's like the Federal Reserve having to ask Goldman Sachs for permission to change interest rates. The Pope has decided that the only way to restore proper church authority is to eliminate the Medici family entirely. The plan is breathtakingly audacious. The conspirators are going to strike during the moment of consecration, when the entire congregation is focused on the altar and the Medici brothers are at their most vulnerable. Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano will be attacked simultaneously at different locations in the cathedral. The Archbishop will seize control of the city government. The Pazzi will take over the banking district, and Pope Sixtus will legitimize the coup as divine justice. It's like planning a corporate takeover, a military coup, and a religious purge all at the same time. The conspirators aren't just trying to kill two people. They're trying to reshape the entire political and economic structure of Renaissance Italy. If they succeed, they'll eliminate the Medici threat and restore traditional authority to the church and established nobility. But here's where the plot gets really interesting. The conspirators have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of Medici power. They think they're dealing with a typical noble family that can be eliminated through violence. What they don't realize is that the Medici have created something entirely new, a form of power that's distributed across networks, relationships, and institutions rather than concentrated in individual personalities. The moment of truth arrives during the elevation of the host. The cathedral is packed with hundreds of Florence's most prominent citizens, all focused on the sacred ritual taking place at the altar. The conspirators move into position, weapons concealed beneath their robes. And then, in a moment that will be remembered for centuries, they strike. The attack on Giuliano de Medici is devastating. Francesco Pazzi and Bernardo Bandini fall on him with daggers, stabbing him repeatedly in a frenzy of violence that's shocking even by Renaissance standards. Giuliano dies almost immediately, his blood pooling on the marble floor of the cathedral. The attack is so brutal that Francesco Pazzi actually wounds himself in his enthusiasm, driving his dagger into his own leg. But the attack on Lorenzo is where the conspiracy begins to unravel. The assassins assigned to kill him, 2 priests, because apparently the Pope thought clerics would be more effective hitmen, lose their nerve at the crucial moment. One of them manages to wound Lorenzo in the neck, but the injury isn't fatal. Lorenzo fights back, drawing his own sword and retreating toward the altar. What happens next is like watching a medieval action movie. Lorenzo's friends and supporters rally around him, forming a protective circle as he retreats into the cathedral's sacristy. The conspirators, realizing that their plan is failing, begin to panic. The Archbishop's attempt to seize the city government fails spectacularly when his own forces are overwhelmed by Medici loyalists. The Pazzi family's attempt to rally popular support collapses when the citizens of Florence realize what's happening. The aftermath is swift and brutal. Within hours, the conspiracy is crushed. Francesco Pazzi is thrown from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio, still wearing his blood-stained clothes. Archbishop Salviati is hanged from the same window, his clerical robes providing no protection from Florentine justice. Dozens of conspirators are executed, their bodies left hanging from the city's buildings as a warning to anyone else who might consider challenging Medici power. But here's the most shocking part. The assassination attempt doesn't weaken the Medici, it strengthens them. The citizens of Florence, horrified by the violence in their cathedral and outraged by the church's involvement in the plot, rally around Lorenzo with unprecedented support. The conspiracy that was supposed to destroy the Medici instead eliminates their rivals and consolidates their power. The political implications are staggering. Pope Sixtus IV, furious that his assassination plot has failed, excommunicates Lorenzo and places Florence under interdict. But instead of cowering before papal authority, Lorenzo fights back. He travels to Naples to negotiate directly with the Pope's allies, demonstrating a level of political sophistication that would impress modern diplomats. The Medici Bank, rather than collapsing after the attack, actually expands its operations. Other European rulers, impressed by Lorenzo's survival and disturbed by the Pope's willingness to use assassination as a political tool, begin shifting their financial relationships toward the Medici. It's like watching a hostile takeover backfire so spectacularly that it actually strengthens the target company. The failed conspiracy reveals something crucial about the nature of power in Renaissance Italy. The old methods of political control, violence, religious authority, noble privilege, are being replaced by something entirely new. The Medici represent a new form of power based on financial networks, cultural influence, and popular support. When their enemies try to destroy them using traditional methods, they discover that they're fighting an opponent who operates according to completely different rules. The stage is set for Lorenzo de Medici to demonstrate that survival isn't enough. He's going to use this crisis to transform himself from a banker into something approaching a Renaissance prince. The family that started by selling wool is about to enter its golden age, and their greatest achievement is yet to come. You've just witnessed Lorenzo de Medici survive an assassination attempt that should have destroyed his family forever. But now you're about to see something that will redefine your understanding of human resilience. Welcome to the moment when a wounded banker transforms himself into the most powerful man in Italy, not through revenge or violence, but through something far more dangerous, pure political genius. It's May 1478, just weeks after the cathedral bloodbath, and you're standing in Lorenzo's private study watching him work. The man before you should be a broken shell of his former self. He's just buried his beloved brother, survived a brutal assassination attempt, and been excommunicated by the Pope. His neck still bears the scar from the assassin's blade, and his left hand trembles slightly, a permanent reminder of how close he came to death. But instead of the traumatized survivor you might expect, you're watching someone who seems to have been reborn through fire. Lorenzo isn't just recovering from the assassination attempt. He's using it as a springboard to achieve something that no banker, no merchant, no non-noble in European history has ever accomplished. He's about to become the unofficial ruler of an entire Italian city-state. The transformation is almost supernatural. Before the assassination, Lorenzo was powerful but constrained by Florence's republican traditions. He had to work within the system, negotiate with other families, and maintain the fiction that he was just another citizen. But the Pazzi conspiracy has changed everything. The people of Florence, horrified by the violence in their cathedral and outraged by the church's involvement, are ready to accept Lorenzo as their protector, their leader, their de facto prince. It's like watching someone use a corporate coup attempt as leverage to become CEO for life. The very attack that was supposed to destroy Lorenzo has eliminated his political constraints and given him the moral authority to reshape Florence according to his vision. He's not seizing power. He's accepting it as the natural consequence of his survival. But here's where Lorenzo's true genius becomes apparent. He's not just consolidating political power. He's creating an entirely new model of Renaissance leadership that combines financial acumen, political sophistication, and cultural vision in ways that won't be matched for centuries. He's not just running a bank or governing a city. He's orchestrating a complete transformation of Italian civilization. The scale of his vision is breathtaking. While other rulers are focused on military campaigns and territorial expansion, Lorenzo is investing in something far more powerful: the future of human knowledge and artistic achievement. He's not just patrolling the arts. He's creating the intellectual infrastructure that will define Western civilization for the next 1,000 years. Consider his approach to education. Lorenzo doesn't just fund schools. He creates an entire educational ecosystem. He establishes the Platonic Academy, brings Greek scholars to Florence, and creates a library that will preserve classical knowledge for future generations. But this isn't just cultural philanthropy. It's strategic nation building. He's ensuring that Florence becomes the intellectual capital of Europe, making the city so essential to European culture that attacking it would be like destroying the Library of Alexandria. The political implications are staggering. When you control education, you control the future. The scholars Lorenzo is training, the ideas he's promoting, and the intellectual networks he's creating will spread across Europe, carrying Florentine influence to every major court and university. He's not just ruling Florence. He's programming the next generation of European leadership. But Lorenzo's most brilliant innovation is how he's redefined the relationship between wealth and power. Traditional rulers derived their authority from birth, military conquest, or divine appointment. Lorenzo has created something entirely new: authority, based on cultural achievement and intellectual leadership. He's not just rich. He's indispensable to European civilization. The mechanics of this transformation are beautiful in their sophistication. Lorenzo has turned the Medici Palace into a combination of court, academy, and cultural center. Every day, the most talented artists, scholars, and intellectuals in Europe gather there to work on projects that will define the Renaissance. It's like Versailles, Oxford, and Silicon Valley all rolled into one magnificent operation. The guest list reads like a who's who of Renaissance achievement. Michelangelo is living in the palace as Lorenzo's protégé. Pico della Mirandola is developing his philosophy under Lorenzo's patronage. Marsilio Ficino is translating Plato with Lorenzo's support. The greatest minds of the age are all working for a banker's son who learned statecraft by surviving an assassination attempt. But here's the most shocking part. Lorenzo isn't just supporting these geniuses, he's one of them. He's not just a patron of poetry, he's one of the finest poets of his generation. He's not just funding philosophical research, he's contributing original ideas to Renaissance thought. He's not just commissioning art, he's collaborating with artists to create masterpieces that will inspire awe for centuries. It's like watching someone simultaneously run Goldman Sachs, Harvard University, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, while also being qualified to teach at all three institutions. Lorenzo has achieved something that modern specialists would consider impossible. He's mastered politics, finance, scholarship, and the arts at the highest possible level. The other Italian rulers are beginning to realize that they're not just competing with Florence. They're competing with a completely different form of government. While they're still thinking in terms of military alliances and territorial control, Lorenzo has created a state based on intellectual achievement and cultural influence. He's not conquering territory, he's conquering minds. The ripple effects are transforming Italian politics. Other states are scrambling to copy the Florentine model, importing scholars, funding artists, and trying to recreate Lorenzo's cultural miracle. But they're missing the crucial element: Lorenzo himself. He's not just implementing a program, he's embodying a new form of leadership that can't be replicated through policy alone. The church is experiencing another crisis of legitimacy. They excommunicated Lorenzo, but instead of weakening him, it's made him more powerful. The Pope's authority is supposed to be absolute, but Lorenzo is demonstrating that moral authority can be more powerful than religious decree. It's like watching someone build a parallel church based on humanistic values rather than divine command. But the most remarkable aspect of Lorenzo's transformation is how he's managed to turn personal tragedy into civilizational achievement. The assassination attempt that killed his brother and nearly destroyed his family has become the catalyst for a cultural renaissance that will influence human development for centuries. He's not just surviving, he's using his survival to create something beautiful and eternal. The man who started as a banker's son has become something unprecedented in European history, a merchant prince whose power comes not from armies or titles, but from his ability to inspire, create, and lead. He's proven that in the new world that's emerging, the most powerful weapon isn't a sword or a scepter. It's the ability to imagine a better future and make it real. Lorenzo de Medici has achieved something that kings and emperors can only dream of. He's become immortal through his achievements. Long after his political power fades, long after his banking empire collapses, long after his name is forgotten by politicians, he'll be remembered as the man who helped create the Renaissance. But this golden age comes with a price. Lorenzo is pouring the Medici fortune into cultural projects at an unsustainable rate. He's creating masterpieces that will last forever, but he's also slowly bankrupting the bank that made it all possible. The family that revolutionized finance is about to discover that even the most sophisticated financial empire can't survive indefinitely when it prioritizes culture over commerce. The stage is set for the next chapter of the Medici story, the moment when the greatest banking dynasty in history begins to crumble under the weight of its own success. You've just witnessed Lorenzo de Medici transform personal tragedy into civilizational triumph, but now you're about to discover something that will fundamentally change how you understand success and failure. Welcome to the moment when the greatest banking empire in history begins to crumble. Not through incompetence or external attack, but through the weight of its own magnificent achievements. It's 1492, and you're standing in the account room of the Medici Bank, watching scribes frantically calculate numbers that don't add up. The ledger books that once recorded the steady accumulation of wealth now tell a very different story. The same double-entry bookkeeping system that made the Medici fortune is now documenting its systematic destruction. Lorenzo the Magnificent is dying, and his banking empire is dying with him. But here's the paradox that will haunt financial historians for centuries. The Medici Bank is failing precisely because it succeeded too well. Lorenzo has spent the last decade pouring money into cultural projects at a rate that would make modern venture capitalists weep with horror. He's funded the construction of churches, the creation of libraries, the support of artists, and the patronage of scholars to such an extent that the bank's capital reserves are nearly exhausted. The numbers are staggering. In the last 15 years, Lorenzo has spent over 663,000 florins on cultural projects, roughly 330 million in today's money. That's more than most nations' annual budgets, and it's all come from the Medici Bank's accumulated profits. He's essentially liquidated 3 centuries of banking success to fund a cultural revolution that will outlast empires. The irony is breathtaking. The family that revolutionized finance is being destroyed by their refusal to prioritize financial considerations over cultural achievement. They've created the Renaissance, but they've bankrupted themselves in the process. It's like watching someone build the most beautiful cathedral in history while their house burns down around them. But as you watch the scribes record the bank's declining fortunes, you're witnessing something far more significant than the collapse of a single financial institution. You're watching the birth of the modern financial system. The Medici Bank isn't just failing, it's evolving into something entirely new. The innovations they pioneered, the networks they created, and the techniques they developed are being absorbed by dozens of other financial institutions across Europe. The London branch of the Medici Bank, for example, doesn't just close when the Florence headquarters fails. It transforms into an independent operation that will help create the foundations of English banking. The techniques the Medici developed for international currency exchange become the basis for what will eventually become the foreign exchange markets. The credit instruments they invented evolve into the financial tools that will power the age of exploration. It's like watching a massive star collapse into a supernova, spreading its elements across the universe to create new stellar systems. The Medici Bank's failure isn't destroying their innovations. It's spreading them across the entire European financial landscape. Every major banking family in Europe has learned from the Medici model, and they're now implementing those lessons in their own operations. Consider what's happening in Germany, where the Fugger family is using modified Medici techniques to finance the Holy Roman Empire. In the Netherlands, Italian-trained bankers are creating financial instruments that will eventually fund the Dutch Golden Age. In Spain, Medici-inspired methods are being used to manage the wealth flowing in from the New World. The Medici Bank may be failing, but Medici banking is conquering Europe. The political implications are equally profound. The Medici model of using financial power to influence politics is being copied by merchant families across the continent. The idea that bankers can become political leaders, that financial networks can transcend national boundaries, that cultural patronage can be a form of statecraft. These concepts are spreading faster than the plague ever did. But the most remarkable aspect of the Medici legacy is how their failure is actually creating the foundation for modern capitalism. The bank's collapse forces other financial institutions to innovate, to develop new methods of risk management, to create more sophisticated financial instruments. The Medici didn't just create a banking system, they created the conditions that would make modern finance inevitable. The techniques they developed for managing international trade are evolving into the mechanisms that will enable global commerce. The methods they created for handling government debt are becoming the foundation for modern public finance. The instruments they invented for managing currency exchange are developing into the tools that will make international investment possible. It's like watching someone accidentally invent the internet while trying to build a better telegraph system. The Medici set out to create a banking empire, but they ended up creating the intellectual and practical infrastructure for the entire modern financial system. Their collapse isn't ending their story, it's beginning the next chapter. The most profound lesson of the Medici experience is how innovation often comes through failure rather than success. The traditional banking methods that had worked for centuries were gradually being replaced by Medici innovations because the old methods couldn't handle the complexity of Renaissance commerce. Now, as the Medici Bank fails, its innovations are being refined and improved by institutions that learn from both its successes and its mistakes. The concept of banking itself is being transformed. Before the Medici, banking was largely about storing wealth and facilitating local transactions. After the Medici, banking becomes about creating wealth, managing risk, and enabling economic growth. They didn't just change how banking was done, they changed what banking was for. The cultural impact is equally transformative. The Renaissance that Lorenzo funded with his banking profits is creating a new class of educated, culturally sophisticated Europeans who understand the relationship between wealth and power in ways that previous generations never could. The artists, scholars, and intellectuals who benefited from Medici patronage are now working for other patrons, spreading Renaissance ideas across the continent. But perhaps the most significant legacy of the Medici Bank is conceptual rather than practical. They proved that financial innovation could be a form of social engineering, That banking could be a tool for cultural transformation, that money could be used to reshape civilization itself. This insight will influence European development for centuries. The nation-states that are emerging from medieval feudalism are learning to use financial policy as a tool of governance. The merchants who are funding the age of exploration are applying Medici techniques to global trade. The scholars who are developing economic theory are building on foundations laid by Medici innovations. As you watch the final entries being made in the Medici bank's ledgers, you're witnessing the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new one. The family that started by selling wool revolutionized finance, transformed culture, and created the intellectual framework for modern capitalism. Their bank may be failing, but their ideas are about to conquer the world. The stage is set for the final chapter of our story, the moment when you realize that the Medici legacy isn't just about the past, it's about the present and future. The financial system you live in today, the global economy that shapes your life, the relationship between money and power that defines our modern world. All of it traces back to a family of Florentine wool merchants who dared to imagine that money could be more than just a medium of exchange. The Medici didn't just create a bank, they created the future, and we're still living in the world they built. You've just witnessed the collapse of the greatest banking empire in medieval history. But now you're about to discover something that will fundamentally change how you see the world around you. Welcome to the moment when you realize that the Medici legacy isn't just ancient history. It's the invisible architecture of your daily life. Every credit card swipe, every international wire transfer, every government bond, every cultural institution you encounter is built on foundations laid by a family of Florentine wool merchants who died 5 centuries ago. It's 2025, and you're standing in the trading floor of Goldman Sachs, watching the controlled chaos of modern finance. The screens flash with real-time data from markets around the world. Traders shout into headsets, and algorithms execute thousands of transactions per second. But strip away the technology, and you're essentially watching the same activities that took place in the Medici bank's counting houses in 1450. The tools have changed, but the fundamental concepts, currency exchange, international credit, risk management, and political influence, are pure Medici innovations. The parallels are so exact they're almost eerie. Just as the Medici Bank created a network of branches across Europe, modern investment banks operate through a web of international offices. Just as the Medici used bills of exchange to move money without transporting gold, modern banks use electronic transfers to move capital without physical currency. Just as the Medici financed governments and influenced politics, today's financial institutions shape policy through lobbying, campaign contributions, and regulatory capture. But here's the really mind-bending part. The specific techniques the Medici developed are still being used today, often in forms that would be immediately recognizable to Cosimo or Lorenzo. The concept of fractional reserve banking, where banks lend out money they don't actually have. That's essentially what the Medici were doing when they created credit through their network of international branches. The idea of using financial relationships to influence political decisions. That's literally the modern lobbying industry. Consider how government debt works in today's world. When the US Treasury issues bonds, it's using a mechanism that evolved directly from the Medici's approach to financing royal governments. The concept of securitizing government obligations, spreading risk across multiple investors, and using debt instruments as political leverage. All of these techniques trace back to innovations developed in 15th century Florence. The Federal Reserve's approach to monetary policy is basically a scaled-up version of what the Medici Bank did with currency exchange. When the Fed adjusts interest rates to influence economic activity, it's using the same principle the Medici used when they manipulated exchange rates to control trade flows. The tools are more sophisticated, but the underlying logic is identical. Even more remarkably, the Medici model of combining financial power with cultural influence has become the template for modern elite behavior. When tech billionaires fund universities, when Wall Street executives endow museums, when pharmaceutical companies sponsor medical research, they're following a playbook written by Lorenzo the Magnificent. The specific causes may be different, but the strategy, using wealth to shape intellectual discourse and social values, is pure Medici. The political implications are staggering. The phenomenon of too big to fail that we saw during the 2008 financial crisis is essentially what the Medici Bank achieved in the 15th century. They made themselves so essential to European commerce that their collapse would have devastated the entire continental economy. Modern megabanks have achieved the same level of systemic importance using the same techniques of network creation, risk distribution, and political influence. But the most profound Medici legacy isn't in finance. It's in how we think about the relationship between money and power. Before the Medici, wealth was primarily about consumption and display. After the Medici, wealth became about influence and control. They invented the modern concept of soft power, the ability to shape outcomes through cultural influence rather than military force. Consider how this plays out in contemporary geopolitics. When China funds infrastructure projects across Africa and Asia, it's using a strategy that Lorenzo de Medici would immediately recognize. The goal isn't just profit, it's influence. The investments create dependencies that can be leveraged for political advantage. It's the Belt and Road Initiative as a 21st century version of the Medici banking network. The technology sector has embraced the Medici model with particular enthusiasm. When Google funds research projects, when Facebook shapes social discourse, when Amazon influences government policy, they're using variations of techniques perfected in Renaissance Florence. The platforms may be digital, but the underlying strategy, using economic power to shape cultural and political outcomes, is fundamentally unchanged. Even the art world operates according to Medici principles. When contemporary collectors fund museums, when galleries shape artistic discourse, when auction houses influence cultural values, they're participating in a system that evolved directly from Lorenzo's approach to cultural patronage. The specific artists may be different, but the mechanics of using wealth to shape cultural narrative are identical. The most shocking realization is how the Medici's failure actually represents their ultimate success. The collapse of their bank didn't end their influence. It distributed it across the entire global financial system. Every major bank today uses techniques pioneered by the Medici. Every government bonds market operates on principles they established. Every international trade relationship relies on mechanisms they created. It's like watching someone's DNA spread through an entire species. The Medici Bank may have died, but Medici banking conquered the world. The specific institution failed, but the ideas it represented became the foundation for global capitalism. They didn't just influence history, they programmed the future. The irony is breathtaking. The family that was criticized for prioritizing culture over commerce ended up creating the intellectual framework for modern business. The bankers who were condemned for charging interest ended up legitimizing the entire concept of making money from money. The merchants who were accused of corrupting politics ended up defining the relationship between wealth and power that still governs our world. But perhaps the most important lesson from the Medici experience is how innovation often comes from the margins rather than the center. The family that revolutionized finance started as wool merchants. The techniques that transformed banking were developed by people who weren't supposed to be bankers. The ideas that shaped modern capitalism came from a society that officially prohibited capitalist activities. This pattern continues today. The most significant financial innovations, cryptocurrency, algorithmic trading, peer-to-peer lending, are coming from outsiders who are reimagining fundamental concepts rather than from established institutions that are incrementally improving existing systems. The Medici model of creative destruction continues to drive economic evolution. As you stand in that modern trading floor, watching the descendants of Medici innovations play out in real time, you're witnessing the continuation of a story that began in 14th century Florence. The family that started by selling wool created the intellectual and practical infrastructure for global capitalism. Their bank may be gone, but their world is the world we live in today. The Medici didn't just succeed, they became immortal through their ideas. And the most remarkable part, their story isn't over. It's still being written every day, in every financial transaction, in every cultural institution, in every moment when money meets power and creates something new. Standing here at the end of this journey, through the Medici's extraordinary story, I'm struck by how their tale illuminates something profound about the nature of lasting influence. The family that began as humble wool merchants didn't just accumulate wealth. They fundamentally reimagined what money could do, what power could look like, and how civilization itself could be shaped by those bold enough to think beyond the constraints of their time. Their story teaches us that the most enduring revolutions aren't won through violence or conquest, but through the patient construction of new possibilities. The Medici didn't overthrow the medieval world. They made it obsolete by creating something better. They showed us that innovation often comes disguised as tradition, that the most radical changes can emerge from the most conservative institutions, and that sometimes the greatest rebellions are carried out by people who claim to be merely serving existing authority. What moves me most about the Medici legacy is how it demonstrates the interconnectedness of all human endeavors. Their banking innovations enabled the Renaissance. Their cultural patronage created the intellectual framework for modern democracy. Their political strategies laid the groundwork for contemporary diplomacy. They proved that everything is connected, that finance and art, politics and culture, innovation and tradition are all part of a single, dynamic system. But perhaps the most important lesson from their story is about the responsibility that comes with power. The Medici discovered that when you have the ability to shape the world, you also have the obligation to consider what kind of world you're creating. Their greatest achievement wasn't accumulating wealth. It was using that wealth to create something beautiful and lasting for future generations. As we face our own moment of rapid change and uncertainty, the Medici example reminds us that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create through our choices, our investments, and our willingness to imagine better possibilities. The question isn't whether we have the power to shape the world around us, but whether we have the wisdom to use that power well. The Medici story continues because we are all, in our own ways, inheritors of their vision. The challenge now is, what will we do with that inheritance?